Welcome to our next discipleship class. This is the Bible Made Clear, and we have been going through the argument for God based on morality. The argument's very simple, and that is everybody has a moral sense. They have a sense of right and wrong. They have a conscience. They have a guilty conscience because they violate it, and it's not something that has developed through evolution. It's not possible because there's no way to justify right and wrong if God doesn't exist. So, therefore, if God exists, then we can have absolute values, something can be absolutely right, something else can be absolutely wrong because they find their grounding of absoluteness beyond us. In other words, it would transcend humanity. If I was just the ground of what I thought was right and what you thought was right, then that would be meaningless. You would have essentially, in what we hear today, a different truth. I would have a different truth, which means there's really no truth at all. Now, there are people out there, many people in higher learning and everything else that will tell you that that's correct. There is no truth. The problem is that they're making a truth claim. So they invalidate their own claim by taking an absolute stance by saying, absolutely, there is no truth, like I say. So that's a truth claim in itself. We've gone through that in point 1 and 2 about the truth exists and the opposite of true is false. You can go back to those recordings if you like. Now, we ended up at the end of part 1 listening to Frank Turek talk to Michael Shermer, who's the editor and publisher of Skeptic magazine, and Mr. Shermer made no sense. Now, he's obviously a bright guy, he's educated, however, he does not seem to be able to add up 1 plus 1 and make it 2 in regard to this moral issue. He violates his own standard, though, again, he doesn't seem to understand that. The next video, actually right after this one, is Frank talking to the president of the American Atheistic Association. And so in doing that, I think it'll also make it clear that atheists find no grounding for their position. Their position is only opinion, which eventually David Silverman will admit, as you'll see in the video. But what that means is that there is no right or wrong. I mean, there's no sense in having a debate or anything else because nothing means anything. So let's listen to that interchange.
David, you were just talking about leaving a kid in an orphanage rather than putting it with a gay couple is immoral. I thought you just told us that there is no such thing as objective morality. Is it immoral or you just don't like it?
No, I said there was no such thing as objective morality. I said all morality is relative.
So why are you objecting to somebody who doesn't want to put a kid with a homosexual couple then? Why are you objecting to that if there's no...
We have the right to object. We are always doing that, okay? We're always making these choices. It's not wrong to say that I'm making my independent choices, independent of any other book or any other holy book. We all make the same moral choices. I find it wholly immoral.
Oh, according to what standard? Your own standard?
According to my standards, yes.
Oh, well, that's okay.
That's exactly the same way you do it.
Okay, well, but are you condemning somebody else for having a different relative standard than you?
No, I'm saying we all have to take responsibility for our moral judgments. We are all making those decisions in real time, just like you are.
Okay,
For the same reason that you're not going into Leviticus and saying, and let's kill the gays, that's immoral to you and me. We're making that relative moral decision. You're supporting your relative moral decision with the Bible, with other Bible quotes that you're finding.
Yeah, but you're confusing the decision with the existence of a moral standard. You're saying that there is no moral standard, or there is a standard objective outside of humanity to which we should obey?
There is no objective moral standard. We are responsible for our own actions.
Responsible to who?
To ourselves and to our society.
Which society? Mother Teresa's or Hitler's?
The society in which we live.
Okay, so
Yes, this is not an easy question.
So at Nuremberg, then, we really had no right to convict the Nazis of obeying their government.
We, as a world society, judge our criminals, and we judge them as we see fit.
I know we judge them, so you're saying we just judge them based on our preferences. You know, in some cultures, they take care of their babies. In other cultures, they eat their babies. Which do you prefer?
I prefer the ones where they take care of the babies. I also prefer the ones where the Nazis don't do terrible things under the name of God.
But it's just a preference.
Yes.
Okay, so
it's an opinion.
Okay, well, if it's just an opinion, you're saying then, if it's just an opinion, I don't know why you condemn a Christian couple for not wanting to put a baby with a homosexual, because that's just their morality that they have every right to express themselves, don't they?
They have every right to do it. I'm saying it's a wholly immoral position.
According to who?
According to me.
Well, okay, well, that's just David
Of course,
Silverman.
it's all according to us. We all make our own moral decisions.
Yeah, I understand.
The only difference between you and me is that I take responsibility for my moral decisions, and you justify your moral decisions by finding a passage in the Bible that matches your moral decisions and saying, aha, it's objective morality.
Well, if there is no objective morality, then we have, it's even hard to talk this way because we say we have no right, but that implies a moral standard too.
No, we have a societal right. Society
according
gives us the
to
rights.
you, or according to Hitler,
society,
or
and according to the government that we create. Yes.
Okay, well, then we had no real way to condemn the Nazis for what they did.
That's the hard answer is you're correct. The hard answer is it is a matter of opinion. The hard answer is they thought they were doing objective good. They did. So we condemn them as a society, but you know, we do this all the time.
Yeah, they may have thought they were doing good, but they really weren't according to a standard. But the only way you could know whether
according
they were
to whose
really
standard?
The unchanging, objective, moral standard that is God's nature. And
they did it under the name of God.
Well, there's a lot of people that you don't judge a philosophy or a religion by its abuse, David. Jesus never said that we ought to go kill the Jews, quite obviously. He was a Jew himself. You should know that.
Yeah.
Okay? So... because people have abused religion doesn't mean that the religion is false.
The fact that people have abused religion shows you that morality is relative. If it was objective, you couldn't abuse it.
No, you're confusing sociology and morality. Sociology is how people behave. Morality is how they ought to behave. We all ought to behave a certain way, but we fail to. By the way, that's why we need a savior. Okay.
You're clapping for that?
So, you see the point here. Now, obviously, Silverman is unable to go beyond opinion, though he does say that things are wholly wrong and immoral, yet he has no basis for that immorality. So let's do a little analysis here. Because there's an error in Mr. Silverman's reasoning. So in the debate, he confuses, number one, knowing the moral standard, which is epistemology. We had mentioned this before. Epistemology, right, is the study of knowledge. In other words, how we know what we know. He was confusing epistemology with what? The existence of a moral standard, which is ontology, right? Ontology is the study of the nature of being, in other words, why something exists in the first place. So he confused those two. So what he was doing, he was arguing epistemologically, saying, well, I understand right and wrong and everything. What Frank Turek was trying to introduce is that there would be no discussion about right and wrong unless there was an ontological standard, moral standard beyond humanity, right, that transcended people. So that's where God comes in, because morality is something that is imposed on us. Sociology is just descriptive, where morality is prescriptive. So sociology just describes, we talked about that last time, what people do. Well, what people do can be right or wrong, but you can't determine right or wrong by what people do. It's just data points, right? he also confuses how people behave, right? Like we just mentioned sociology, with how they ought to behave, which is morality. So that should sum up normal logic and reason in order to approach this subject, showing that Mr. Silverman was obviously confused based on his own position.
Now, how do we know there's an objective moral law? First of all, we pointed out before that absolutes are undeniable. And we know this by our reactions, not our actions. In other words, you know right from wrong by your reactions, not your actions. For example, if I steal from you, I may not think stealing is wrong, but what do I say the second you steal from me? Hey, something's wrong here. If someone comes up to you and says, I don't believe in right and wrong, what should you say to him, or what should you do to him? You kick him in the shins, right? Hey, how about that? Is that wrong? What are they going to say? Of course they're going to say it's wrong, right? They react when they're wrong, and that helps tell them what really is right and what really is wrong. Don't look at me, or don't try and determine or discover what I think about morality by what I do, because I do wrong things all the time. But you discover what I think about morality by how I react when you wrong me. Then I suddenly get real morally indignant, don't I? Okay? So we know it by our reactions. You remember I told you the story about the blue folders. If you remember this, about the professor who gave the student an F because the student gave his paper to him in a blue folder. Remember that? He said all morality's subjective. There's no such thing as right and wrong. There's no such thing as justice or injustice. All a matter of opinion. You like chocolate, I like vanilla. That was the student's paper. Professor put an F on the front of the paper. Said, F, I don't like blue folders. And the student was morally outraged, right? What do you mean, F, I don't like blue folders? That's not fair. That's not right. That's not just. The professor said, wait a minute. Your paper said there's no such thing as fairness, rightness, or justice. You get an F because I don't like blue. See? He reacted to how he was treated, and immediately he knew what really was wrong about what the professor did. There is a rightness, a fairness, a justice out there, and he reacted when he was treated unfairly. We also can't know injustice unless we know justice. C.S. Lewis, one of the great Christians of all time, who started as an atheist, he started as an atheist because he couldn't believe in a good God with all the evil and injustice in the world. And then he realized something. He said, I wouldn't know injustice unless I knew justice, and I wouldn't know justice unless I knew God. Here's what he said. He said, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust, but how would I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You don't know what a crooked line is unless you know what a straight line is, right? You don't know what injustice is unless you know what justice is. You can't know that somebody is not right, i.e. wrong, unless you know what is right. And atheists are notorious for claiming that Christians are immoral. But how do they know what immorality is unless there's a standard of morality beyond them? Now, we got to be very careful here when we're talking about this, because atheists take this the wrong way. Let me point out what we are not saying and what we are saying. We are not saying that atheists can't be moral. They can. And we're not saying that atheists don't know morality. They do. They know it just like we do, in the sense that it's written on their hearts. But here's what we are saying. Atheists can't justify morality in their worldview. They can say there's a moral law, but they can't give any reason why there is a moral law, because there's no standard beyond themselves. We could put it this way. Atheists can theorize about how we know murder is wrong, but atheism provides no objective standard that establishes why murder is wrong. They say, you got this sense of morality from Darwinism. First of all, Darwinism can't explain how we got here physically, much less how morality got here, which is not physical, it's immaterial. But even if you grant them that, even if you were to say, we learned morality from Darwinism, even if you grant them that, that doesn't explain why murder is wrong. It simply explains how you know it's wrong. See the difference? There's a difference between how you know something and that something exists. And here's where the atheists confuse themselves all the time and try and confuse us. In fact, there's an atheist running around out here lately. His name is Christopher Hitchens. In 2007, he wrote a book called God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. You may have seen this book. He's a very witty guy, Christopher Hitchens. I actually kind of like him. You see him, he's debated a lot of Christians lately. He's debated Dinesh D'Souza, who I think did a pretty good job with him. But Hitchens is real witty, real quick, knows a lot of history, a lot of literature. But his book, his entire book, is based on a false premise. The premise is how religion poisons everything. But the truth is that religion does not poison everything. Everything poisons religion. First of all, there would be no poison in the moral sense unless God existed. So he wouldn't know that, how religion poisons everything, because there's no poison unless God exists, morally, from a moral perspective. See what I'm saying here? But secondly, his whole premise is that religious people have done evil, and so therefore it's not true. That doesn't follow. Because people have done evil doesn't prove it's not true. In fact, we agree with atheists that some atheists live better moral lives than Christians. It's true, okay? It's sad but true. Some atheists who don't have the Holy Spirit sometimes live better moral lives than we do. Why? Well, we have all the Holy Spirit, but he doesn't have all of us, right? Because we don't always give ourselves to him, right? We resist the Holy Spirit. Read the book of Acts. They're resisting the Holy Spirit all the time, aren't they? But secondly, we also point out that some who say they're church people have poisoned the teachings of Christ. Church history has often been immoral, unjust, and even overtly evil. It's true. Church history has been immoral, unjust, and overtly evil. But here's what we are saying. There is no moral or immoral, just or unjust, good or evil, unless God exists. So people like Christopher Hitchens and other atheists, like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and some of these folks you may have heard of, they're sawing off the limb on which they sit. Because morality comes from God. There's only one place you can ground objective morality, and that's in an immaterial being, because it's an immaterial thing, morality. And if atheism's true, if all we are is chemicals, if we're just glorified chemicals in the periodic table, there is no such thing as anything immaterial. So morality doesn't exist. Yet here they are pounding the table. You Christians, you're so evil, you're so immoral. How do you know that? What do you mean immoral? Your worldview can't justify morality. So we can agree with these folks. Yeah, church is messed up. And doesn't Jesus talk about that a lot, actually? Who does he go after more than anybody else? The church, or the Pharisees at the time, the religious people who thought they were so righteous, they looked good on the outside, but on the inside, their heart wasn't right. He went after them more than anybody else. So just because you say you go to church, just because you say you're a Christian, may not mean that you really are. Jesus said, some will come to me, Lord, Lord, didn't we do this in your name? Didn't we do that in your name? And what's the Lord going to do? Away from me, I never knew you. Values conflict. This is the moral dilemma situation. You're in a lifeboat, and this is what college professors are known to do, to try and teach you that morality is relative. You're in a lifeboat. Fit for 4, you got 5 people on board. If you don't throw somebody off, everyone's going to die. Okay, break up into groups. You guys decide what you would do. 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 And you guys decide what you would do. And then come back after 10 minutes of discussion. Well, they all come back. They all have different answers. All the groups have different answers. And the professor says, see, morality is relative. Is it? Question. Why are you in a dilemma with this scenario? You're in a dilemma because there is a moral law. In fact, there would be no dilemma if life wasn't so supremely valuable, right? If life wasn't valuable, you'd say, who cares? Throw everybody off. It doesn't matter. But you don't say that. Why? Because you realize that there is an absolute moral right to life. There would be no moral dilemmas unless there was an absolute moral law. The very fact that you're in a dilemma is because you recognize that absolute moral law. And in this fallen world where we have bad things happen, sometimes absolutes are going to conflict. That doesn't mean there's not a right answer. It means that sometimes you might not know what that answer is. But it doesn't prove that morality is not absolute. It is absolute. Look, there are very difficult problems in morality. And there are very simple problems in morality, too. The difficult problems don't negate the simple problems. Just like there are difficult problems in math or calculus, there are very simple problems, too, like 2 + 2 = 4, right? And just because you might not know the answer to some equation that goes 10 pages in a textbook somewhere, doesn't mean you don't know that 2 + 2 = 4, right? So don't let complex problems get you away from the fact that there are simple problems and simple solutions. And there are simple principles of morality. And 99.9% of the time when we have to make a moral decision, it's a moral decision based on an easy black or white choice, right? Every once in a while, you get over here and you go, gee, I don't know what the right thing is. But this issue over here doesn't negate the fact that there is a right over here, right? That you can know easily. And the moral law written on your heart means everybody knows intuitively what the right thing is on the big issues. It doesn't mean that we have every detail of morality figured out. How about when the Nazi comes to your door? Right? What do you do then? Hast du Juden hier? You've got Jews upstairs in your attic. Schnell, schnell, kommen Sie hier. Hast du Juden hier? What are you going to do? You do. They're in there. Don't lie. Tell the truth to a murderer? What are you going to do? I know what I'd do. Lie. Why? Because when absolutes conflict, and Christians can disagree on this, but I'm just giving you my view. When absolutes conflict, the greater obligation takes precedence over the lesser obligation. You have a greater obligation to protect life than to tell the truth to a murderer. Now, some theologians like Augustine didn't agree with this. But I think, and this is called graded absolutism for those of you who are taking notes, that there's a hierarchy. And the hierarchy exempts you from the lower obligation. You can think of a hierarchy like this. We have the greatest obligation to God, the next obligation to people, and the final obligation to things, right? Last year, or earlier this year, whenever it was, Michael Vick got into a lot of trouble for dog fighting. It's terrible, dog fighting. It's awful. But in this country, we're more upset over dogs being killed than human beings. It's true. Think about it. No moral outrage over someone going into an abortion clinic, having the baby completely delivered virtually, and having her brain sucked out with a vacuum cleaner. No moral outrage over that, but Michael Vick killing dogs? Ooh, prison time. I'm not saying he ought not go to prison, don't get me wrong. I'm simply saying that I think our priorities, we've inverted this, haven't we? All right, let's get to the bottom line. We disagree on values. We disagree. So therefore, values are relative. First of all, one of the reasons for this is not an issue of denial. It might be confusion. Here's the confusion. The confusion is the difference between ends and means. I'll give you an example. Both pacifists and militarists desire peace in the end. They only disagree on how peace should be attained, right? Some of this might have to do even in the Iraq war situation, right? Some people are saying, look, we ought not be at war. Other people are saying, no, we ought to be at war. We ought to be at war. But both parties really do want peace. Most of them do anyway, right? The question is, what's the best means to get to that end? Is the best means to say, no, we're not going to fight anybody? Or is the best means to say, look, we need to fight them because if we don't, there's going to be more dire consequences down the road? You can debate that. But look, both sides want the same end. Both sides want peace. I don't know anybody really out there who wants war all the time. So it's an ends and means situation.
So I know that those were two relatively lengthy videos, but Frank is explaining it really very well. He goes into some detail on the other issues that really get off into a conversation of ethics. I teach a high school class on Christian ethics. Actually, you can't really have ethics unless you're dealing with God, which we're realizing through this moral issue. But because this isn't a course on ethics and going into the different ethical situations that we find ourselves in culturally or from a society or whatever, I thought it was good to let them play because they walk down that road, because in having that discussion, it kind of ferrets out the details of this moral issue, because ultimately morality and ethics are really dealing in the same realm, but our discussion is really focusing on the fact that without morality, which everybody has, then there's no conversation about God. You have to bring morality into the issue because it does exist, and because it exists, it is giving us the foundation to say that God exists, because if God did not exist, not only would we not know right or wrong, and even if we did know right or wrong, if we did understand certain moral values or all have that same sense and feel guilt and, the disturbing of our conscience and everything else, even if that was the issue, there would be no way to justify and say, well, this is right and this is wrong. It would just simply be opinion because God did not exist. So
here are the objections you're going to get.
Let's one more.
And these objections are either confusions, intellectual confusions, or they're outright denials of the will. Okay? The first three are confusions. And then we'll talk about denials. The first objection you'll get is cultures have different values, therefore there is no real, absolute, objective moral value. It's subjective. One culture has X, another culture has Y. There you go. Proves it. We'll talk about that. Secondly, values have changed. We used to burn witches, for example. We used to have slaves. Now we don't do that anymore, so values have changed. We got to deal with that. Then there's the objection that values conflict. It's the old life raft dilemma. You're on a life raft that's fit for 4 and you have 5 on. If you don't throw somebody off, then everyone's going to die. So what do? They conflict. Or the Nazis come to your door and you're hiding Jews. Are you supposed to tell the truth to the Nazi, or are you trying to save the life? Aren't you supposed to tell the truth? Yeah. You supposed to protect life? Yeah. What do? See, they can't be absolute. They're relative. You got to deal with that. Then finally, we disagree on values. And this is more an issue of denial than it is confusion. We'll talk about that when we get there. Let's go to point 1. Cultures have different values. This is a cow. Everyone can see that? Now, in India, cows are sacred. Where do we get sacred cow from? I assume it's from India. Is that where we get that from? I guess. And they're so sacred to the point that some people starve to death while cows are all around them. Now, obviously here, we have no trouble taking Bossy into the slaughterhouse and having a good steak. So our values, they seem to value cows more than people. What's going on? Right? That's a cow. This is grandma. Now, in India, they don't believe in slaughtering grandma, and neither do we, right? But why in India won't they slaughter a cow? You know why? Because they think grandma might be in the cow. They believe in reincarnation. See? And they think that some of the souls of their departed loved ones may be in the cow. Now notice, this is not a difference of values. This is actually a difference in understanding. You have an absolute value versus a relative understanding. The value is the same. You're supposed to respect elders and your ancestors. We agree with that, and so do the folks in India. What we have a different understanding in, or understanding of, is where is my ancestor? Where is grandma? If we thought grandma was in the cow, we wouldn't take her to the slaughterhouse, would we? The value is the same. Respect your ancestors. Respect life. What differs is the factual understanding regarding whether or not grandma's in the cow. In India, they don't believe it's right to eat grandma, and neither do we, right? It's not right to eat grandma, okay? So the same value exists. It's just the difference in our understanding of where grandma is. Now, perhaps that's an oversimplification, but you get the idea, okay? Also, sometimes there's a difference between what and how. What do I mean by that? A kiss of greeting is considered polite in some cultures, but in other cultures, it would repel you. Now, notice that the value to express respect through a greeting is absolute. Doesn't matter what culture you're in, when you see somebody, you're supposed to greet them. But the difference is in how you express that. What should be done, the greeting is the same, but how it should be done is different. Sometimes it's a hug, sometimes it's a handshake, sometimes it's a kiss. Whatever it is, it's different. They say that Eskimo wives actually express love to their husbands sometimes by chewing his boots before he leaves the igloo. Why? Because you need to warm up those frozen boots. Now, that's an expression of love, but it's in a different culture. If you come downstairs one night, man, and you see your wife chewing your shoes or your boots, you wouldn't think that was an expression of love now, would you? No, but it might be in a different culture. The expression or the value, love, is the same, but how it's expressed is different. The second, that values have changed. We used to burn witches, and we used to have slaves, but we don't anymore, so values have changed. How do we deal with that? Well, first of all, let's point out that this is another indication or another instance of the absolute value versus the relative understanding. Why were witches burned? And by the way, how many witches were burned, as far as we know, in Salem, Massachusetts, way back when? Anyone know? How many? They hanged them, burned them. How many were killed? Anyone know? Anyone have any idea? 5 and 10. As far as we know, I think there were 18. 18 or 19. Now, you would think that from the very popularity of the issue, I mean, everyone seems to know this, that there would be thousands of these people. Now, I'm not saying that 18 or 19 isn't significant, but it's 18 or 19 people, okay? But why were witches burned or hung or killed? Why? Why were they killed? Thought they were evil. The reason they were killed is witch hunters used to believe witches murdered people with their curses. They used to think that witches were murderers, that they could curse people and kill them. We know that that's not the case now. In fact, the moral value of murder did not change. People's understanding of whether witches are murderers changed. Did you like those little guys flying back and forth? I think they'll come out again if we wait. I got to back it up. Here we go. Watch. Yeah, there they go. That guy's trying to catch the witch. Right? What changed? What changed was our factual understanding of whether or not witches were murderers. If they were murderers, maybe they should have died. But if they're not, of course not, we ought not kill them. Now we say, no, witches don't murder people, so let's not kill them. What's the same? The value's the same, life. Life is sacred. What changed is our factual understanding of whether or not a witch was a murderer.
All right, so it's good if you've never taken an ethics class, that will certainly give you a foundation.
Hey, Kyle.
And before we get into this one, this is a student answering at the end of one of Frank's "I don't have enough faith to be an atheist" tours at a college. So what he'll do, he'll basically reduce the whole presentation we're doing over multiple sessions here, and then he combines it into probably an hour-and-a-half presentation. He flies through some issues, and then will give students an opportunity at the end to ask questions. So this student's going to ask him on the moral law, but I want you to listen carefully, because we'll talk afterwards about what this student says. All right, so let me get it started again here.
There you go.
Hi, I'm Kyle.
Hey, Kyle.
I'm an atheist.
Hey, thanks for coming.
Of course. I love hearing these kind of debates and stuff. You asked, why would you be an atheist if you possibly might know if God exists? My answer to that question is simple. It's just the fact that there's so many terrible things in the Bible. Like, at one point, Jesus says to, one of his disciples, it's great that they're, torturing their slaves here, but only lightly, even though they did nothing wrong. It's great that they're doing it. He doesn't give any reason to why he says that he doesn't do anything. I don't understand why you would want to follow such a God. And my question to you is why you would follow such a God.
Okay, let's not even look at the context of that passage. Let's just assume what you said is 100% true. Okay? As an atheist, why is that wrong?
Why is that wrong?
Yeah.
Morally, I would think that each and every human being here is the same. We all have the same rights. We all have the same wants and needs. I think we all should do the same. I think that we should, especially the God that we should follow, should have higher expectations of knowing such a thing.
Okay, but you seem to be assuming that certain things are really right and people have certain rights, even if there is no God. How do you justify that? What's your standard of rightness if there's
My
no God?
standard of rightness would be a fair society.
What do you mean by fair?
Fair? Everything is equal. I personally, I have nothing wrong. I find nothing wrong with a communistic state. That's just my opinion. I don't think it's anything to be afraid of. Everybody seems to be afraid of it.
Okay.
In the United States at least. But that's just my thought of fairness, is the idea that all humans should be the same. We all
Okay, so it's your thought of fairness. What if Hitler has a different idea of fairness? Is he wrong?
He's not wrong.
Hitler's not wrong.
He is not, well, in a kind of idea that we all have our own opinions. I feel like we should take the utilitarian view and go with what is best for the most amount of us.
Okay, but what do you mean by best?
What would mean the greatest positives for the most amount of people?
Okay, but you're assuming that you're assuming there's a best out there. You're assuming a moral law. Where does that moral law come from if there's no God?
Moral law. I personally just think that human beings should be able to make up their own laws. I mean, each people in time have found their own moral laws, and I think that they become better and better over time.
Better, but you wouldn't even know what better was unless you knew what best was. So I'm asking you, what is your standard of best to say that certain people are closer to the best or better than others? What's the standard? Is it just your opinion, or is there something beyond your opinion which says this is good?
Well, I mean, we've all heard about utopias and a perfect society and things like that. That would be great in a way, but also we've all seen like the books like Huxley's, I believe, I forget what it's called, but he makes a book on this
Great
perfect
New World?
society. Yes.
Okay, yeah.
It's that perfect society that everybody's perfect. There's no murder, there's no any of that.
Okay, but the question is, and maybe I'm just not stating it properly, what's wrong with murder if there's no God? Why shouldn't I kill other people to get what I want if there's no God?
Because it doesn't help society.
Why do I care about society?
Because
There's
we
no
as a
God.
group should worry about society. We should be making the betterment of ourselves.
But Kyle, you're importing a moral law into a frame that has no moral law. As an atheist, you're trying to say there is no God, which means there is no standard of rightness out there. But I'm saying this is my personal standard of rightness, which would mean somebody else could come along like Hitler or Stalin and say, Kyle, if there's no standard beyond neither you or me, then I can do whatever I want, including killing you to get what you have.
It's a very good point. It's a very good point. I can see where you're coming from. I don't think that God is needed in a sense I'm not looking for perfection. I don't think anybody here is. I'm not looking for that. I'm looking for human beings just to simply work together to better society. I don't really see that need for a perfect identity up above.
Okay, I mean, I'm not saying that an atheist can't be a good person. I'm not saying atheists don't know right from wrong. That's not my point. My point is that it seems to me it's difficult to justify what rightness is if everything is reduced to human opinion. Which human gets to decide, right? It's subjective then, as Levi was saying before. It's just in my subjective mind. If there's not an external reference to say that this is good and this is evil, then we're all just here and we're fending for ourselves. Now, a lot of people will say, and I appreciate your question, it's a very good question. A lot of people will say, well, we need to cooperate to get along, right? Actually, that's not true. Take somebody like Stalin. He cooperated with very few people, just his henchmen, and he killed 20 million people to get what he wanted. And then he died on his deathbed at the age of 74, shaking his fist at God one last time. He never paid for his sins on this life. Okay? So the problem, it seems to me, is we know, and you know right, and you know what's right and wrong, and I know it too, and I don't need to believe in God to know that. I just need there to be a God to justify it. Let me put it this way. A lot of atheists say, look, I know right from wrong, and I agree with you, know right from wrong. But that's like saying, I can know what a book says and deny there's an author, which is true. But there would be no book to read unless there was an author. The same is true when it comes to morality. You can know what the right thing to do is and deny there's a God, but there would be no right thing to do unless there was a God. Does that make sense?
I guess I can see your point, yes.
If I gave you a book, would you read it?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay, so in this video now, you heard what this guy Kyle said, this student, but he's missing a large point, and that's fine. I mean, he's a student, he's learning, he's young. Like he talked about in a communist country. Well, in a communist country, this kid most likely would not be in college, would not have the ability to express his opinions if he was in college, and would not enjoy the freedom to make any choices on anything the government doesn't want him to do. In other words, he intellectually doesn't seem to have a problem with communism because he is bought into the Marxist understanding that, well, we'll just basically make everybody the same, of course, other than the people that are managing it, right, the government. But we'll make everybody the same, and nobody will have anything, so nobody will want what somebody else has. And Karl Marx figured, well, then everybody will be happy. Well, the reality is that you cannot change human nature. You can try to change the conditions of society, but then there are immense problems, and that would never work, because no matter what communist country we see, which is really the outgrowth of Marxist ideology, that will never actually work, because it is actually unethical. And you are controlling people's lives. They have no freedom, and this kid doesn't really understand that. He's living under a system, like it says here, that provides him the privilege to have the freedom to make statements he could not make under a communist regime. he couldn't sit there and say under a communist regime, well, I think that capitalism is really the better thing to do, and I think that we should have freedom of speech and everything. He'd be disappeared. Like all of a sudden, he just wouldn't be around. So they don't allow dissent. Communists and Marxists do not allow dissenting voices. They are totalitarian. They control everything, including what people are allowed to and not allowed to do, say, participate in, express, any of that. So, what's interesting about him is that in the same way that we've talked about, epistemology and ontology. So the atheist, in a sense, argues that they know right and wrong, but epistemologically, but ontologically, right and wrong would not exist if God doesn't exist. So Frank's made those points very, very clear with good examples. The car engine, right? I can be a mechanic and know how to work on a car engine, and I can know everything, the ins and outs of it, and I can deny that Henry Ford ever existed. But there would be no car engine to work on to know all about epistemologically if ontologically Henry Ford did not create the car engine in the first place. So what he's doing is the exact same thing. He's expressing his freedom of opinion, right? He's really exercising his First Amendment rights to believe something different and express something different than Frank Turek is. However, at the same time, he is expressing that he finds no problem in a communist government, but a communist government would not provide him the same freedoms that he is exercising at that point. He just doesn't realize that. In the same way, an atheist, though talks about morality and says, I understand it, has difficulty. Maybe it's because they don't want to at times, and other times maybe they just miss the point. But they have difficulty realizing that their understanding of right and wrong would never exist truly. I mean, they certainly can't justify it because it's only their opinion and there is no place to ground absolute morality or absolute right and wrong if God doesn't exist. But actually, their understanding of right and wrong still wouldn't exist. I take a step beyond that and say they wouldn't even know what right and wrong is if God didn't exist and put it in their hearts in the first place through their conscience. Because animals kill all day long and none of them feel bad about it. And they actually enjoy the meal, okay? So, the lion doesn't say grace before he starts eating the gazelle or anything else. And if we have nothing more to us than we are animals that are just evolved higher, that does not import some aspect of right and wrong value. That does not import any absolutes. There is nothing objective about what I do from a good, bad, right, wrong, moral or immoral position. It's just, you can't create it. You can't create it from the ground up. It has to be imposed from the top down. Otherwise, it's just all opinion, it's chaos, and nothing really is true or makes sense. And so even having the discussion is meaningless because there's nowhere to go. I guess that's the issue that I realize that people just seem to miss. Here's another one I think you'll enjoy.
So lately I've kind of been struggling with pretty much being able to defend, like as a Christian, like we're supposed to, defend and love others, but how do we even what I think is awesome, like how Jack's doing, just promoting the law, exposing the types of bills and stuff to get us involved in government, voting and having that obligation as a Christian. How do we at the same time love and respect, the choices people have without forcing our beliefs onto them and making that into the law?
Well, actually, that's what everyone's trying to do. Everyone's trying to put their own beliefs into the law. All laws legislate morality. The only question is whose morality. So it's impossible not to legislate a moral position. The only question is whose moral position. And so what I try and tell people is, look, when they say, don't impose your morality on me, I say, first of all, why not? Would that be immoral? See, because they're imposing their moral position on us when they say that. But secondly, the better answer is, this isn't my morality. I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact that murder's wrong, that theft is wrong, that rape is wrong, that abortion's wrong, that men were made for women and women were made for men, and the best way to perpetuate and stabilize society is to value that relationship legally over any other sexual relationship. I didn't make any of this up. So it's not my morality, it's not your morality, it's the morality. It's the one Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. It's the one the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 2 says, the Gentiles are not of the law written on their hearts. So I always point out, everybody's trying to impose a moral position, and I'm not trying to impose my moral position or your moral position. I'm trying to impose the moral position. Now, if I have that wrong, then correct me on it. But I'm trying to do the same thing Thomas Jefferson has done, and the same thing the United States Constitution tries to do.
So, let's see, as we move forward here, so from the three arguments we know this. From the cosmological argument, it deals with the beginning, right? So God or the creator or whoever created the cosmos is immaterial, timeless, and spaceless, all-powerful, created everything from nothing. The teleological argument, the design argument, the creator would have to be all-knowing and intelligent, okay, obviously, to create everything with such design and sustains creation and has a purpose. The moral argument, as we're going through, obviously this being, this creator, has to be absolutely moral and perfect because he needs to be the source of morality, where morality is grounded. In other words, where absolute good, right, is all grounded so that what is wrong and immoral is clear and would have to be personal. And these obviously describe the God of the Bible without going into the Bible and getting those descriptions. Now, we're heading up towards an hour, so I'm going to stop here. We'll kind of continue this on. Should be able to finish it in the next video. I know that was a lot of Frank Turek, but he does such a good job. There's no sense in me trying to duplicate those particular clips because he articulates himself better than I do anyways. So anyways, with that, certainly if you have any questions, send me an email, BibleMadeClear@gmail.com. But until next time, may God richly bless you as you continue to study His Word.